The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests of this program and are not necessarily those of station staff, management, or sponsors. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. It's time to Ask a Rabbi. Call in with your questions and comments at 340-1590. And now, here's your host, Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
Good morning, everyone. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb, and welcome to Ask a Rabbi on this beautiful March morning. Starts with an M. And please give me a call at 772-340-1590 if there are any questions you might have that you'd like to ask a rabbi. So, all right, we had talked about all different kinds of things last week, and I wanted to talk a little bit today about interfaith and about the different faiths. And I use an example when I teach world religion to try to help the students understand the ideas of different religions, because I start out the class with a very clear assertion that all religions are correct for their adherents.
Okay.
And, otherwise they wouldn't be doing them. Mm-hmm. And I draw on the blackboard a 9 or a 6 lying on its side. And I position 2 little stick people on either side of the numeral, and one says 6 and the other one says 9. And I ask the class, are they right? Is one of them right, or are they both right? And most students will look at that and go, yeah, they're both right. They're never going to convince the other one. The best you can do is walk around the 6-9, and does the 6-9 care what you call it? Right? Or does it just simply care that you're in a relationship with it? And most people get it, that's an analogy for relating to God, because we all perceive God differently. Right? Science has shown that we don't perceive the same color red. Right? There's a Christmas Carol song or a parody out there that summarizes it well. Is your red the same red as my red? Because perception happens in the brain. Mm-hmm. We take in sensory information, but depending on our brains and even the sensors, we can see different things, so there wouldn't be people who are colorblind if we all saw the same thing.
Even when you go to the emergency room and you see the little chart that they have that has the your degree of pain.
Yeah.
Because you can't go, well, I broke my arm, and that person who's triaging you, they don't know what level of pain you're in, because every single person is going to handle it differently.
Right. There's so much of what we do that's different that people don't even begin to get. One of the things that I like to point out, particularly to when there is mothers in my classroom, and some of my older students are mothers, and some of them have multiple kids, and I'll ask the question, are your kids all alike? And, the answer is no. They were different in the womb, right? They were different from the get-go. They've always been different, and they'll always be different. And different children evoke different responses from their parents as well, right? So, even when a parent tries to be level and quote-unquote even and fair and alike across the kids, that doesn't work, because the kids are not the same. And I always like to point out to people, if you had a sibling growing up in your house, you both have different families. First of all, your sibling is in your family and you're in your sibling's family. So right there's a difference.
Plus then there's the relationship your sibling has with your parents.
Right.
Versus your relationship with your parents.
And it's
there's a lot going on there.
There's a lot going on that's all very different. And so,
that's why I guess you have rules of the house. Then this is the way we do these things in this house.
Right.
And everybody does their best to do, and of course kids challenge that all the time.
Right. And you have to temper that according to who belongs in the house and what's going on. For example, if you've got people under 3 feet, you can't have everybody, cleaning the top 6 feet of the cabinets. right? So you've got to deal with what's going on in the house. What are the unique pieces? What's happening where? And so if we parse that back to our relationship with God, with the divine, then we all are going to have a very different relationship with God, and our perception of God is going to be different. And in Jewish liturgy, that's actually handled by one of the blessings of the standing prayer. The prayer is said standing at the center of the service. It's called Amidah in Hebrew, and that means standing. It's the standing prayers. And the very first one of them is kind of interesting because it says, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of Sarah, the God of Rebekah, the God of Rachel, and the God of Leah. Or Leah and Rachel, depending on which version of which prayer book you're using. The order is slightly different. But we're taught that the reason that it doesn't say the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and list everybody, is because the God of Jacob was different from the God of Isaac and the God of their father Abraham. So each of us has a different relationship with God because we're different. And God is so immense, so diverse that God can have all those relationships, and it's not a problem for God. If it's a problem for anyone, it's a problem for us. And so there is this tremendous diversity, and that's simply magnified across the different religions. So I start out with that, and I actually had a most interesting experience this past week. I had a student say to me, well, that's clearly a 6 and not a 9 because it's curved. And my mind just automatically went, okay, depends on the font.
Yeah, exactly.
Depends on your penmanship.
Right.
And forgive me, but God help you if you think you know everything that well.
But did you feel as though this student will be challenging you along the way quite a bit?
I wouldn't say challenging me as much as running into her own roadblocks.
Okay, because this seems like I know that I'm right because.
Yeah, well, and that's often.
And nobody can really be that. You're not always right.
You're not always right.
Maybe
is exactly right.
You're more wrong than you are right.
It's the fallacy of primacy. I heard it first, and what I heard first is the only answer, or what I heard recently is the only answer. But those folks change more. And but what really came to my mind, and what always comes to my mind when somebody puts down stakes like that and says there's one right answer and I've always been challenged by that. I was challenged by that when I was in college, but I'll tell that story in a moment about college. But let me go and give you the answer of what I thought of when that person was saying that, which is it's an old Zen story of the new student comes in and wants to impress the Zen master with how much they know. And he's been granted a tea with the master. And the master's sitting there and says a few things, and the student just bubbles over with everything they know. And then they're spitting it out faster than humans can speak. And after a couple of attempts to try to penetrate this I know everything kind of mentality, the master calls for tea to be poured. And the person starts pouring the tea and doesn't stop. And the tea, of course, comes over the edges of the cup and down onto the student. And finally the student screams and says, what are you doing? I'm getting burned here by the tea. And the master says, when you are filled with knowledge, there is no room for more. Yeah, and people will get burned is obviously the implication. So I always think of things
leave
like
some
that.
room for more.
Leave some room, yeah. Make a place for new information to come in, for new things to enter your life. And so to me, that's, if you will, the beauty and the importance of what I call walking around the 6-9. Okay, if you don't walk around that numeral, then you can't see how different it can look for people. And you get let me keep my pronouns to myself. I get a much better understanding of God and even of Judaism by looking at how all these other religions do their approaches to the same God. Right? It's the same God. God's bigger than any one religion. Rabbi Kushner says it in an interesting way. He says, God is like a mirror. The mirror never changes, but everybody sees something different. And I thought that's kind of an interesting piece, right? God is the mirror. We all see something different in God. And so I find it really useful as an individual and obviously as a professor to be able to look at all the different traditions and acknowledge the similarities and the differences, because we've got much more alike with other religions than any of us might expect.
Well, I would think you would have to, because you're up there teaching, and everyone who walks into your classroom already comes in with a different opinion.
Of course. Yeah. And and I also tell them a couple of things, right? And I'd say this to anybody who's listening as well. If anything I say challenges your faith, then your faith is fragile, and you need to look at that rather than what I've said. Why is your faith fragile? What is it about your faith that is so precarious? Because your faith should not be precarious, no matter what somebody's saying. And because it's only words. Yeah, at least in a classroom, it's only words.
But some people aren't open enough to hear other information.
No, sometimes, unfortunately, you don't always get a great openness. And I understand that. And I see Sharon said something about attending a church service, but I can't see the rest of it. I'll answer that in a moment, Sharon. So anyway, I always do try. I keep in my mind a story that Stephen Covey talks about in his book of the 7 Habits. He talks about an experience on a subway where he's sitting there trying to do whatever he's doing while the subway's going, and a man gets on with a couple of kids. I think I've told this story on the radio before. Maybe not.
I think so.
You think so,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Where the kids are misbehaving, and I'll tell it quickly, and the man doesn't do anything, and Covey finally challenges him about it, and the man says, forgive me, we've just come from the hospital, and their mother just died. And, instantly, the kids don't change. Their behavior hasn't changed. The man hasn't changed. What has changed is Covey's understanding of the situation. And so I always try to keep that story in mind, that there might be something I'm going to hear, I'm going to learn, that's going to dramatically change how I view something. And, and so I try not to put my judgments on anything other than me. I'm not perfect. Don't think that I am, but that's what my goal is, right? My target. Because, as my good book says, right, judgment is mine, says the Lord. It's not for me to judge everyone. Now, does that mean that, ask a lawyer that if you're in a court of law, you of course judge?
There's a little judging going on.
There's a little judging going on there, but that's more about whether or not your actions harm somebody,
right.
or
and that's to get to the bottom of a dispute.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. It's to create peace. And, so we were having another discussion. I've had so many interfaith discussions. It's kind of interesting in itself that's just been a topic that's been kind of flurrying around me the past few weeks. Another one came just this past week. Somebody was talking about Wicca, people who are pagans or Wiccans, and the person was complaining about Wiccans who invoke spells to control people. And my comment was, well, that's a problem inside Wicca too, because that person is not doing what Wicca teaches. Wicca has a creed, if you will, and it goes this way: so long as you hurt no one, do what you will. Well, if you're going to control someone, that's hurting them. That's abrogating their right to self-determination. And that's harming them. So that's not, I don't know any religion where that's, considered a good thing to harm somebody else. Does that mean that...
I'm having a problem with the power you're giving yourself to think that you can.
Well, that's another issue. But let's let's ignore that part of it. Even let's say you could somehow, which, that's kind of saying you can control God, which is, I've got other problems with that. But if you can, then you're violating the rule. Because you're hurting someone.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so that's not a good Wiccan. That's not a good pagan. And what can I say? Every system has got things like that in it. Right? Judaism has, love your neighbors, you love yourself, don't do unto others what you find hateful, which is very similar to the Zoroastrian golden rule. Christianity flips it to the do unto others as you would have them do, simply a flip on it. And other religions have very similar. In fact, when I lived in Tucson, we made up a big chart of all of the golden rules of all of the different religions. And you'd be surprised how they're very, very similar.
The words are different, but the meaning is the same.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes the words are not even that different.
Mm-hmm.
Confucius said pretty much the same thing, too. Now, are all of these people perfect? Now there comes the rub. Most religions don't have their teachers being perfect. Most religions. For many religions, like Confucius is human, Buddha is human. Do they attain something higher in some varieties of some of those religions? They do. But, Moses is human. Most of the Zoroaster is human. And so they've got feelings too. Right? Moses has an anger problem. We've talked about that, I know, on other issues. So, we are made up of human beings. It's what God created. And obviously I've got a Jewish reason for understanding that. And Sharon, nobody else has said anything. I'm going to, okay, so yeah, Sharon says that when she attends somebody else's service, she looks at it as a lesson in comparative religion. And that's as good a way to look at something like that. So the other piece that one of my students brought to my attention was kind of a left-handed thing. They said to me, well, do you believe in the Bible? And my answer is, well, I'm a rabbi. Of course I believe in the Bible. And the question then becomes, what do you believe about the Bible and what's the Bible? Well, good. Okay, so let's look at the word Bible, another one of my popular topics. The word Bible comes to us from Biblos. It's really a codex is what this is. It's a set of pages sewn in leaves into a binding. And that's a technology that came out of the town of Biblos. Because prior to that, people used scrolls or tablets or other really easily luggable, researchable things. I like to tell my students, how would you like to study for your finals? By unrolling a scroll and finding the answers there. No, there's no text markings and no chapters.
And no index, nothing.
No index, none of those things. Those are all later technologies because people got tired of reading the entire scroll. And
so someone said there's got to be a better way.
Somebody said there's got to be a better way. So
Yeah.
they took the old habit was to take a scroll and fold it bookwise and read it. But, somebody said, well, how about if we stitch it and glue it? And they came up with the technology of creating biblos. And some languages have we have a bibliography, right? The list of books in our research paper, although for me those are journals, but in the old days they were books. And some languages still carry bibliothèque as the library, the place where you put all those biblos. And so the Bible, the biblos, is the book, right? Which is the same book that the Quran says, "O children of the book, pay heed." It's one God. And so for me, the Bible is this set of 39 volumes, books, chapters, whatever, however you want to look at it, because there's a set of 13 prophets, the 13 minor prophets. And do you call that one book or do you call that 13? And when I count each one separately and I count the 1 and 2 of the different books, it comes out to 39. And but it ends in Chronicles. Right? It does not include what Christians call New Testament, because for me, the book was published, done, finished, canonized. And so, yes, I believe in this. And then the person then went on to quote something out of Corinthians to me. And I'm like, okay, that's your scriptures, and they're valid for you, and we can talk about what that means, because I even understand it differently than you do. In fact, I used to teach a course called The Jewish Understanding of Christian Scriptures, which was that's a lot of fun to teach, because there's a lot of Jewish the Gospels and the surrounding other books were written originally by Jews for Jews. They were just followers of Jesus. And so there's a lot of Jewish references, understandably, because it's built on this text. Otherwise, there were many a Christian early fathers who wanted to get rid of the Jewish scriptures underneath and found they couldn't, because you can't make sense of Christian scriptures or the newer Christian scriptures without the older piece underneath it. And does it change things? Yeah. That's why we don't have it in we don't have it in because the book was closed. But where it goes on in Judaism is it goes on into Talmud, and which are commentaries. It's like the church fathers, the writings of the early church fathers. The Quran has the Hadith. Everybody's got a secondary text that goes with their main text. The Hindus have their texts. Right? Everybody's got, Confucius has got the Analects. There's all kinds of different scriptures, depending on which religion you're in. And so, yeah, I believe this, but what does that mean that I believe? So there's the kosher laws in there, right? The kosher laws say, don't seethe the kid in its mother's milk. Now it says don't eat any animal that doesn't chew its cud and have split hooves. So that kicks out horses and pigs and rabbits and some other things that a lot of other people eat. And we can get into longer discussions sometime, and maybe we will, about dietary laws in particular, about why they're a certain way.
Well, there is a science to it too, because there's a reason why you should not really eat the bottom-dwelling catfish.
Yeah.
Because they're eating all the dead things, and what they eat, you eat. And
Yes.
maybe you should, you shouldn't.
Maybe you shouldn't.
I mean, there
and
could be
well,
a science reason.
There can be, and I don't think that it
they
was
knew
just
better
done
than we
as-
did.
Yeah. Well, they watched it, and people got sick, and they said, "Don't do
Maybe
that." Right. And when they say fins and scales, right. So let's look at those, right? So the animals are vegetarian. They chew the cud. They have to be a grass-eating animal. And those are all animals that will dry. The meat will dry and jerky quite easily. And that's probably very handy, particularly if you're a desert-living people, to have food that'll work in a desert environment. Fish that'll dry, right? You bring squid or shrimp up, and it's going to spoil. It's not going to dry. So is there an element?
Quickly, and you'll become sick.
Yeah, you'll
quickly.
become sickly. Yeah. Pork maybe not as quickly, but you're still going to get
again,
sick.
it is
Yeah.
what they eat. Again, back
Yeah.
to what.
Because they'll eat anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So a variety of different, so I excuse me. Do I think it's all about health? No, I don't think it is. I think that some of it's about humaneness to the animals and proper treatment and things like that, because it talks about that as well. There's a lot of different rules inside Scripture, like don't yoke two different size animals to plow your field, because it's not fair. It's not fair to the animals, and so it's filled with things like that. And
Well, you put a burden on the smaller one,
Yeah.
and you would be harming your animals.
Yeah, exactly.
So these are almost like just good rules to live by.
They are absolutely good rules to live by. And there's any number of them that I really, really love. So I think that there is a health benefit to following the rules for dietary, but I'm not sure that that's the be-all and the end-all. And the meat and milk one, there's a kind of a funny joke about it, because in three different places in scriptures it says don't seethe the kid in its mother's milk. Now it's talking about how animals die and or are slaughtered, and so was this a way of throwing a live kid into boiling milk from its mother? Yuck, right? Which is very nauseating to me, but but then I'm an animal lover too. So I really see that in the text, the be kind to the animals, treat them properly, and don't just eat what you find on the field, because you don't really know anything about that. And there's a famous story about craving meat, and the birds fly overhead and drop down. Sudden death of birds, and the people who eat the birds die. So, and it's called the Valley of the Cravers. Yeah. So, be careful. So, all of those things, I think, play in, and some of it is stuff that they learned about how to interact as a people. Some of it's things that people learned from the Silk Road, up and down the Silk Road. Ideas came and went, and religions changed as people mingled and learned from each other. And that, if a religion can't change, then it's going to become obsolete. It's going to become a footnote in the history of humans, because we'll see if I can get some liquid in me. We are changing, and our technologies are changing. And so what's available, what's not available, changes. And I'm reminded of something that actually Pope John said after Vatican II. His comment was, it's not that the gospel has changed, it's that we have begun to understand it better. Right? And so that's part of it as well. Right? It's connecting into the text and understanding it. Now, yes, that's part of my training, is to look at the texts. It's a very specific, intentional part of my training because of my renewal training. I can't speak anything today. Great for somebody on the radio. And but it's to go through and look at the things that are said in scriptures and in other sources and pull them through into today and make them meaningful and powerful today. What was the intent? Not necessarily what are the words, but what was the intent? Why are you supposed to tie a blue thread? Why did they stop? And isn't it time to go back to it? What's that blue thread about? Well, there's an instruction that says, put a blue thread on the fringes at the corners of your garments to remind you of God. And we stopped doing that because the Romans made it illegal. And, it's kind of bad to get killed for wearing them.
But see, that was a tie that would bind the people together.
And so they continued to tie the fringe. Right? We still have the fringe, but not everybody has the blue strand. And the storyline was that the mollusk from which the dye was made went extinct. Not quite, but it wasn't worth getting killed over. The decision was to modify the ritual, the habit, to keep enough of it to keep it functioning, but not enough that you'd get killed. And it wasn't the wearing of the fringes that was made illegal. It was the wearing of blue if you weren't of a certain class. There were all kinds of rules that Rome imposed that we can't even begin to imagine living under the kinds of rules that people lived in those days. And so there's another question here. Some of the Orthodox methods of slaughtering are very painful, says Al. They're not supposed to be. They're not supposed to be. And does that happen? Yes, unfortunately. It's amazing to me how many people will modify and subvert things as part of coming at the religion. It's like bending it to what they want, rather than looking like at, what does it mean, right? To slit the throat and let the blood drain, if it's done well, is a very painless, it's a very quick, very painless. Consciousness is gone almost immediately. And it is not the tie up the animal, hang it upside down, and cut its head off, which is a much slower, you got to tie up the animal, turn it upside down. All those other wonderful things, that might be efficient for the slaughtering house, but they're not kind to the animals. And, I don't have easy answers. I don't claim that I know the solutions to these challenges, because I know that we do need to be able to efficiently process food. And maybe, I was thinking the other day, maybe cloning is part of the answer. We clone meat and grow it that way instead of growing animals that feel pain out in the field.
The only thing is the cloning is still a birth. It's still sort of the same.
Well, it depends on how that's cloned. Some of it's actually grown in the petri dish. They can grow organs now without
parts.
Parts.
Okay,
And so you can grow a steak, right?
That feels creepy in some kind of way for me.
I hear you.
Now, and have you seen they're experimenting with donor organs, like say a heart for heart transplants, where they clean all of the tissue, and then they run the blood through it's pure white when they're finished with it, and then they run the blood of the person who will be receiving
to get it
that
more acceptable.
That donor, and it becomes like theirs.
Yeah, it's much easier to absorb.
That's amazing technology.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
We have no idea where things are going to be in 50 to 100 years. Hopefully we won't have blown ourselves up or, done anything worse than that. I don't know what could be worse at this point, but I'm sure I don't want to ask. It's... I keep telling people when people say to me, what could be worse? Don't ask that question. Don't ask to find out. There are some things that we just need to work through. And so to me, the truth, if you will, of this book is in how it helps me lead what I hope is a better life and be a better part of community. And I think that's what it's really aimed at. And, I'm not going to really worry about how big a cubit is or isn't, other than to note, as we did last week, that the Book of Esther is rather humorous in that people do not build gallows in their backyards that are 75 feet high. And if you think they do, then you're not paying attention. And I find that's true, because I'll
I don't think that it was literal. I believe that it was an exaggeration to make a point.
Yeah, I think it's exaggeration to the point of absurdity. And if somebody doesn't pick up that it's that, then they're not consciously listening. They're hearing the words, but they're not listening. They're not paying attention. And people, of course, do that all the time. They read things and have no idea what they're reading. When you ask a kid what's in the Pledge of Allegiance, you get all kinds of interesting responses. Nothing, that may have nothing to do with what's really in the text. And, I can remember, as I've said other times on the show too, that when I was in high school, I sang, Strangers in the Night, and thought nothing of the words. And then some decades later, was listening to the song on the radio and went, really? Really? I used to sing that? Ugh, as a teenager, that's not right. It's not what I should have been singing.
But you didn't hear it that way.
I didn't hear the words at all. Right.
It was the melody. Melody.
Yeah. It's a great melody, and the voices are wonderful, and But I also can remember, trying before the internet to try to figure out what lyrics of songs were, because you couldn't figure it out. And so a lot of lyrics were blah, blah, la, la, la. And I guess I must have sung a lot of la, la, la in that, but I don't think I did enough of it, if truth be told. I'm sure that I sang some of the words that I know are there now.
But you did. But the meaning was different for you at the time.
It just didn't register. It did not register, yeah. Yeah, I was a teenage zombie.
That and songs a long time ago left a little to the imagination instead of the way that it is today. It's pretty blatant today. Strangers in the Night is pretty blatant. But even as a teenager, you didn't really realize. Yeah. So
yeah,
and
I guess that we'd be making love before the night was out. I guess I had no idea what that meant.
And that's a good thing. Your mom and dad did a good job.
Yeah.
They protected you from knowing these things.
From knowing those things,
That they did a good job.
Yeah. The radio, the TV, not the TV, TV and movies make sure that you do know what that means now.
Well, it took more talent to hide it.
Yeah, it did. It did. Well, those back in the days of married couples lived in twin beds.
Yeah, only on TV.
Yeah. And things were always wonderful. And, you didn't see puffy-eyed, black-eyed kids coming out of households. So anyway.
But they did. You just didn't see them.
Yeah, you didn't see them.
Because nothing's really changed.
No, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
We've always had problems. I was listening to Ask a Lawyer, and I was listening to the story he was telling about horrific things that happen. And I guess I'll share this with anybody who was listening to him, and maybe I'll let him know again later since he had to duck back to the office today real quick, that from at least one rape victim that I know, she shared that at the end of it, even though the guy got off, it helped her heal that he had to come to court and face the charges. So, you never know what it is that's going to help make somebody whole. Did that do everything they needed? Probably not, but it helped. And that was one that took a long, long time to get to trial. So we never know what people need and what will help them. And I think that's also important. So this seems like a really good place to segue to a couple of things. We've obviously got Purim coming in the next week. And please join us, especially on Friday. Friday's going to be Dress Up Friday. It's going to be a lot of fun. Some special things. I think I have to bake some Hamantaschen. Those cookies that we aren't going to talk about.
And
either.
you mentioned a couple weeks ago that you have several costumes.
I do have several costumes.
Are you ready, or
you know
you're
what?
Still
I
working
have
on
not.
it?
I'm still working on
Okay.
it. So no, we can't find out what the rabbi is going to be on any of the different days that she wears a costume. But I will tell you that in the past I have gone as a Hamantaschen. I have been a Swaro cactus for King Ahasuero. That one was fun. I was a blue feather poodle. I've been many things. I've got a gecko outfit. Yeah, I've got a closet full of things that I can't wear again because I've worn them. And it will be a surprise. And I love seeing the chuckles, and I like having fun with the costumes because that's what it's all about. It is about having some fun. And right behind it, 1 month later, is Passover, Pesach. The reservations for that should be up on the website this week, so you should be able to make a reservation. We are hosting first and second night. That's April, I want to say 20th and 21st. It's that Friday and Saturday. I might be wrong. I can't check on my phone right now because I'm streaming on it, so I can't double check that. But the weekend before it, on the 14th, April 14th, we will be hosting the Treasure Coast Art and Craft Festival, which is free to anyone who wants to come and perhaps find some great crafts and some great fine art. At the same time and in the same location, but a slightly different part of the room, we're going to also have our Direct Seller Fest. And that's for anybody who is a direct seller. So that would be, I'm hoping that we'll have somebody there from Discovery Toys, Mary Kay, any of the different direct sellers, Avon. So anybody who's interested, we're only going to let one person in from each company for the Direct Seller Fest. So you might want to get those tables quickly. The numbers are on the Facebook right now, and they will be on the website also this weekend. Numbers to get the vendor application if you'd like it. More information as well on all of those things will be coming out this coming month, and I know that we'll be talking more and more about it. So please do, or worst comes to worst, give me a call, 520-247-4741. That's my cell, and I will see that you get a contract as well if you're interested in being a vendor, either as an artist, as a crafter, or as a direct seller. And we'll take it from there. So we should be having a great time. That's April 14th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., free to the public. It's part of our outreach into the community part, and hopefully we'll see you there. And that's, I should say where it's at. It's at the Port St. Lucie Community Center on Oroso Boulevard, right across from City Hall and the police station. So it's a nice location, and even if it rains here in Florida, you'll be safe because you'll be inside with us. So all of those are great things that are happening. More information on that as we come closer in this last month leading up to it. And then the week after it, Seder's. And then the calendar continues and we move on into the summer. So please do join us. A little bit about Congregation Eitz Chaim while I'm waiting to see if anybody wants to call me on 772-340-1590. And you can call from anywhere. And Sharon, no, but you can. And she's asking me if I called any of the reps for different companies. And she loved the Swaro. Thank you. And I'm also being told that the Seders are April 19th and 20th. So that's Friday and Saturday. Friday night and Saturday night of that weekend. That week. That's first and second night Seder. And it's open to anyone who'd like to make a reservation, come join our community, be part of it for that evening. So, Congregation Eitz Chaim, we do Friday night services at 7:30, and they're musical and they're fun and they're participatory. A little bit, I think a little bit different from what a lot of people might do, and very much the same. Yeah, we enjoy the Shabbat, the Sabbath. We welcome it. And then Shabbat morning, Saturday morning, Stolen Moments from 9:30 to 10:30, which is text study and discussion. And then at 10:30 is a service, a Shabbat morning service. And that usually goes till around noon, maybe a few minutes after it. And check the website for other things that are happening. Those are our exciting things. We've got an Intro to Judaism class starting up soon. Keep an eye out for that as well. And, a drumming and meditation on Monday afternoons. And if there's enough interest, we'll also do one on Sunday. So those are some of the things that we're up and about. And I hope that you'll give me a call either on my cell phone for the temple or here at the station to ask me a question at 772-340-1590. So back to our discussion earlier about text. Everybody's got it. Everybody's text is right for them, but most people never read it. Most people never begin to read it. And even among those who read some of it, they still cherry pick. I still cherry pick. Everybody does. You pick the pieces you want to work with, and
or the parts you understand.
And there's certainly a lot more there that can be plumbed. One of my favorites about plucking and cherry picking is there's a line in one prophet that says, beat your swords into plowshares and your spears into pruning hooks. And the other prophet says, it does it the other direction, take your plows and make them into swords. So, you can find what you want if you want to cherry pick it. And some people really cherry pick. They'll take a part of a sentence and totally change what I think the text intended and what it meant. Like, one of my favorites is the line in Leviticus that says, don't do the sex bed with the males either. That's not how it's usually understood. Because it comes after a whole line of things not to do with women. And then it says, and don't do it for the guys either. And we all know how that gets reapplied. So, what can I say? Why did it change? Why did our understanding of it change to something? That's a good question. Different agendas, different times, different folks. And you go from there. And so we do have somebody calling in with a question. And we have Michael on line one. Go ahead, Michael. Thank you for calling.
Hi. I'm just calling to ask about the practice of kosher and halal meat. I've just never understood why Judaism and Islam practice a certain way of killing an animal for their meat. Just asking about why they choose to do that.
Okay, so the question was, why is kosher and halal, which are very similar methods of slaughtering an animal, how did that technology get started? Well, again, you have to realize when it started. Islam started by following the then Jewish practice, which was not an uncommon way to slaughter animals, actually. And I'll tell you what the comparison was with that, Michael. The idea is that if you slit the throat, if you can hit the vein correctly, that the animal bleeds out immediately, at least consciousnessly, and that it's a relatively painless way to slaughter an animal. It's certainly better, or I won't say better, that's not the right word. It's less painful for the animal than shooting it, because you can miss really easily. Certainly, arrows don't kill an animal quickly. And hitting it on the head with a hammer, not necessarily as effective either. So the idea was that if you are trained and you properly hold, the problem is that sometimes people hold the animal improperly to make sure they can cut the throat properly, and then it becomes cruel. So you have to really look at it. And the way we kill turkeys and chickens to turn them upside down and lop their heads off is not. That's the commercial method of slaughtering. And if you have any questions, Google it. You can see it being done. In fact, you can see there's an ironic piece behind Sarah Palin where she's pardoning a turkey, and she stood in front of the line where they're slaughtering the turkeys. So the news clip has her standing there talking about how she's pardoned this turkey, and in the background, the guy's looking at her and putting the turkeys in the chute. If it wasn't so tragic, it would be quite funny. So that's a little bit about that. And so there is not... and I don't know that we really have any better technology even today. And you also have to realize that not as much meat was eaten as anywhere near as what Americans eat today. So it's much less meat in their diet.
Well, the saying about animals who are on the list for extinction, if you eat them, they won't be extinct, because what we'll do is we'll breed to eat them.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to pull them off that list, just start to eat them.
Yeah. Well, and so I've also seen the argument, eat beef because you kill one animal to feed a lot, as opposed to killing a bunch of chickens. So there's all kinds of different arguments that go into the different things. And some people choose to become vegetarians to totally avoid that whole concept. And so the other part of halal and kosher is to say an acknowledgement to God that you're taking life. You're not leaving it up to God. You're slaughtering the animal ahead of its time. And if we think that isn't done, when we eat any meat, right? Sacrifice is still going on. We just wrap it in plastic and put it in Publix or in Bravo or Winn-Dixie, any of the supermarkets or any private meat seller.
So basically, it's making sure that you don't do it in a cruel manner.
Right. In fact, the testing for the knife that's used for slaughtering is it's got to be able to cut a hair without moving it. So we're talking a super sharp knife. I've actually watched slaughterers sharpen that knife, and you can slice yourself and not be remotely aware that you've done it. So it's the jaggedness of the knife that causes the sore, if you will, when you're cut, the imperfections. So that's the background behind that. The effort is to try to make it as painless and as non-threatening. Now, you were talking earlier about health. You're going to get a lot less adrenaline in your meat if the animal is not scared. So it's probably healthier too. So there is definitely a health component, but I don't think it's the be-all and the end-all.
Mm-hmm.
I think that animal cruelty, being kind. If you've got to eat protein on the hoof, then you need to be humane with that protein as best you can. And so are you still there, Michael?
Yes, I am.
Okay, did I answer your question, or was there more?
Mostly my question is about like the purpose. I was thinking that it was more for a spiritual purpose, but I wasn't necessarily sure. But you kind of answered and a little bit more. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, the blessing that is said when it's done is a thank you to God for that life, and an acknowledgement of taking it. So yeah, that's that if you will, that's the spiritual component, and then just the being kind to animals, which is the first line or the first instruction to Adam is not to be Lord and master of the planet, but to be its shepherd. And the shepherd doesn't manipulate the animals, takes care of them. So, hope that answered some of it for you, Michael.
Oh yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for calling. Appreciate it.
Yep. You have a nice rest of your day.
Okay, thank you. And so we are getting ready to wrap it down. There are, in Judaism and in Islam as well, and in Christianity, there's more than one layer of meaning for everything that's done. That's true in all faith traditions. I'm not trying to exclude anybody in that boat. There's like 12 or 13 major religions, and there's gazillions of varieties within each one. There's many, many different ways to be Jewish, just as there's many, many different ways to be Christian, many different ways to be Muslim. Diversity is, Muhammad said that was God's gift. And that is indeed part of it. And Al is pointing out there's an instruction to feed animals before we ourselves eat. So they shouldn't sit there hungry watching us eat. So that gives you an idea of the idea of being kind to the animals. You feed them first, and then you can eat. And that way they're not sitting there going, I'm starving, and you're eating. Yeah, it's just
But
not
your
nice.
dog might do that anyway.
Well, your dog's going to probably look at you after they eat their
no
food.
matter,
Right?
you still
Yeah.
want it.
Well, yours, there's a cartoon that says, they have a steak, and they give me this dry kibble to eat. And he's probably healthier with the dry kibble. What can I say? I would probably be healthier on dry kibble. I'd probably eat less, too. Such are the joys. And so we get to look at the joy of cutting leaven out of our diet for 7 or 8 days, depending on how long you celebrate Pesach or Passover. We'll be taking more of a look at that as we move into the spring season. And we are down to 1 minute. I'm going to extend just a word of sympathy to anyone involved in the shooting down in New Zealand at Christchurch. May they find some comfort in their memories, and may we find a way to help people not find a need to shoot each other up someday. As they say in Yiddish, Alavai. May it be God's will. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb, and this has been Ask a Rabbi.